There are a few urban corridors in North America that people already understand as megaregions. The Northeast is the clearest example. Florida's Interstate 4 corridor is another fast-growing model of connected urban development, connecting Tampa through Orlando to the Atlantic coast in a ribbon of development that has absorbed more population growth than almost anywhere else in the country over the past 30 years. Both of them are on the eastern half of the continent, both of them are well documented, and both of them are the answers most people give when asked to name the great urban corridors of North America. Almost nobody mentions the Pacific Northwest. And yet, a corridor running along the western edge of the continent, from Eugene in the south to Vancouver in the north, it has grown from a modest chain of mid-sized cities into a region of 11 million people, two of the most powerful technology economies on the continent, and one of the rare major urban corridors in North America built around a working international border. So how did something this significant go this unnoticed for this long? Before making the case for Cascadia, it is worth being precise about what the term megaregion means, because the definition matters more than the label. A megaregion is a network of metropolitan areas linked by shared infrastructure, economic systems, and geography, functioning together as a single competitive unit in the global economy. The Northeast Corridor is the clearest example, a near unbroken chain of urban development where you can move from one city to the next without passing through open country. Florida's Interstate 4 corridor is a second model, cities connected in a continuous ribbon by the same highway and the same growth logic. Cascadia does not yet meet that strict definition. Between its cities are rural gaps, farmland in the Willamette Valley, forested terrain between Portland and Olympia, and agricultural land near the international border between Bellingham and Vancouver. The Cascade Range walls the corridor off to the east, and the Coast Range and Salish Sea compress it from the west, forcing every city into a narrow, linear path running north to south. The result is what planners call a string of pearls, distinct metropolitan hubs separated by dark stretches of protected land. But the string of pearls is getting denser, and the economic connections between them are deepening in ways that suggest this is not simply a collection of cities that happen to share a latitude. It is something in the process of becoming, and the southern end shows how that process started. The corridor begins in Eugene, Oregon, at the southern end of the Willamette Valley. Eugene used to be timber country. The industry that built it spent decades stripping the forests, and when global timber markets shifted in the 1980s, the economy sustaining the city collapsed almost overnight. What happened next was not the slow decline that swallowed dozens of similar cities further east. High-tech firms arrived, drawn by the University of Oregon's talent pipeline, and by a geographic beauty that was becoming harder to find in cities where the cost of simply living there had consumed everything else. By 2012, the metro had acquired the nickname the Silicon Shire, which nobody would have predicted for a timber town 2 decades earlier. Eugene is also the birthplace of Nike. It's founded by University of Oregon track coach Bill Bowerman and his former athlete Phil Knight, which tells you something about what happens when athletic culture, academic infrastructure, and mountain scenery share the same valley long enough. Eugene itself grew from around 36,000 people in 1950 to more than 176,000 by 2020, while the wider metro reached roughly 383,000. The timber economy nearly finished it, but the tech economy gave it a second life, and that second life is what anchors the southern end of the corridor. 35 miles north, Oregon's state capital occupies the corridor's most underappreciated position. Salem is not a city that generates headlines or inspires strong opinions, and that is precisely what makes it interesting. Government cities grow without drama and compound without fanfare, and Salem has been doing both for 70 years. The state of Oregon is by far its largest employer, producing stability that no private sector, boom or bust, can disrupt. Salem is proof that the least glamorous anchor in a corridor can be one of its most durable ones. And durability matters more than glamour when you are building something meant to last across generations. Portland anchors the Oregon subcorridor at the confluence of the Willamette and Columbia rivers, with a metropolitan population of 2.5 million. Its western suburbs of Hillsborough and Beaverton form what the semiconductor industry calls the Silicon Forest, a global cluster for chip fabrication running quietly in the background of a city far better known for its coffee culture, cycling infrastructure, and complicated relationship with its own identity. Portland inspires stronger opinions than almost any other city its size in the country. But the semiconductor economy underneath all of that noise is one of the most significant industrial assets in the Pacific Northwest. What Intel and other chip makers built in those western suburbs is part of the supply chain that the entire technology economy of the corridor depends on. The question Portland has not yet answered is what its next chapter looks like. And that uncertainty is part of why crossing the Columbia River into Washington feels like entering a different conversation entirely. Cross the Columbia River into Washington, and the corridor starts to feel heavier. The cities get larger, the technology economy gets denser, and the sense that the corridor is building towards something accelerates. Olympia, Washington's state capital, holds a statistical distinction that sounds impossible until you understand the geography behind it. Between 1950 and 2020, Olympia grew from a small capital city into the anchor of a metro area approaching 300,000 people, all without a technology boom or a cultural moment. Olympia's expansion is geography doing the work that industry usually does. It sits at the southern tip of Puget Sound, at the exact hinge between the agricultural plains of southwestern Washington and the dense urban mass building northward around the Sound. In 70 years of compounding growth in the most powerful urban market in the Pacific Northwest, pulled a small capital city into the orbit of something much larger than itself. Seattle is where the corridor becomes impossible to ignore. Its metropolitan area exceeded 3.9 million people by 2020, making it the largest in the entire chain, and its economic footprint extends far beyond those borders. Amazon and Microsoft are both headquartered here. The city leads the continent in cloud computing and has become one of the most significant centers for artificial intelligence research on Earth. Seattle is also home to some of the only permanent floating vehicular bridges in the United States, two structures that carry interstate traffic across Lake Washington on pontoons. In March of 2026, light rail began running across one of those floating bridges, creating what Sound Transit described as the world's first light rail line over a floating bridge. That detail matters not because of what it says about engineering, but because of what it says about Seattle. This is a city that has spent a century solving problems that geography created and other cities walked away from. North of Seattle, Bellingham sits 21 miles from the Canadian border, at the southern end of the same valley that runs north into the heart of Greater Vancouver. Cross-border retail, logistics, maritime services, and higher education flow through that valley in both directions. And as the cities at either end have grown, Bellingham's role as the connector between them has become more consequential rather than less. It is less a city at the end of the American corridor than a hinge between two national urban systems that have been quietly integrating for decades. What lies on the other side of the border is the piece of the corridor that makes Cascadia unlike anything else in North America. The corridor crosses the border into Canada, and what it finds there has no equivalent in any other megaregion on the continent. Vancouver, British Columbia, is the third largest metropolitan area in Canada and the largest in Western Canada, with a population of 2.7 million. It is the major anchor that gives Cascadia its cross-border character, sitting on the Canadian side of a corridor otherwise driven by Seattle and Portland. And that position has given it an economic function that no other city in the chain can replicate. Amazon and Microsoft have both expanded significantly into Vancouver, drawing in global engineering talent that American immigration constraints make difficult to bring directly into Seattle. Vancouver functions as a talent valve for the North American technology economy, pulling workers from around the world into a corridor that is economically integrated with Seattle, regardless of which side of the border those workers technically operate on. Vancouver is also famous among North American cities for avoiding a freeway through its downtown, a planning decision that has produced some of the highest public transit ridership and downtown residential density on the continent. That combination of international talent access and transit-oriented urban form makes Vancouver the most distinctly different city in the corridor, and the one that gives Cascadia a dimension no other megaregion in North America possesses. The corridor ends with an unusual final anchor, an island capital with no road connection to the mainland. Victoria, the capital of British Columbia, sits on the southern tip of Vancouver Island, and reaching it requires a ferry crossing or a seaplane. That physical isolation has influenced a character distinct from every other city in the chain, a colonial architectural identity, a tourism economy, and a pace of life that seems deliberately removed from the density and velocity building on the mainland. Greater Victoria grew into a region of nearly 400,000 people by 2021, and what was once a city defined almost entirely by British heritage and afternoon tea now generates $5.9 billion annually from a technology sector that nobody saw coming. An island endpoint most of the world had mentally filed under quaint has become one of the more significant technology economies in British Columbia. If that transformation happened here, it is worth asking what the rest of the corridor has not yet fully revealed. The rural gaps between Cascadia's cities are the direct result of the geography that defined the entire corridor, and understanding them changes how the whole region reads. The Cascade Range runs its full length to the east, and its peaks decide where cities can and cannot grow and how every city in the chain thinks about itself. Mount Hood frames Portland, Mount Rainier is visible from Seattle on clear days, and Mount St. Helens reminds the entire region periodically of what the landscape is capable of. Olympic and the North Cascades define the northwestern corner of Washington in ways that no planning decision could replicate. Every city in Cascadia is built in a valley at the foot of a mountain range, and that shared condition produces something more than scenic similarity. It creates a common relationship to outdoor recreation, an environmental policy and land use that runs through the politics and culture of every city in the chain regardless of which country it sits in. The mountains are why the corridor exists where it does, why it is shaped the way it is, and why the cities inside it share an orientation to the natural world that distinguishes Cascadia from every other urban corridor on the continent. The gaps between the pearls are part of what made them what they are, and that geography is what sets Cascadia apart from every other corridor on the continent. That argument is not difficult to believe when you look at what the individual parts already add up to. Seattle's technology economy is one of the most productive on the continent. Vancouver's international talent pipeline feeds directly into it. Portland's semiconductor manufacturing underpins the supply chain that both of them depend on. Eugene and Salem and Olympia and Bellingham are filling in the spaces between the anchors in ways that have been largely invisible to anyone not tracking the census data closely. The corridor is already functioning as an integrated economic region in the ways that matter. The label is still catching up to the reality. The gaps are still real, and the rail project is still a project rather than a track. But from Eugene to Victoria, 11 million people are living inside something that has been quietly assembling itself for 70 years, a chain of cities growing toward each other along a line that the mountains drew, connected by an economy that does not stop at the border and a landscape that makes all of it unlike anything else on the continent. Whether Cascadia earns the formal name is a question of time and infrastructure. What it already is, right now, is the most underrated urban corridor in North America, and the corridor most likely to surprise everyone who is not already watching it.